presenting about their projects, and I will introduce our first speaker and project, which the title of the presentation is an evidence-based approach for designing and advancing youth health service systems. And this will be presented by Dr. Brad Nakamura, who is a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. And he is a licensed clinical psychologist and the director of the Center for Cognitive Behavior Therapy, which is a research, training, and therapy services clinic at the University of Hawaii. So join me in welcoming Dr. Brad Nakamura.
Oh, thank you. Let's check the laser pointer. Good. Forward.
And then do you want to use this mic?
Backward. I'll try to see if I can get away without it.
Okay.
Yeah.
There should be, yeah.
I like to walk around. Just nice to see you. Very blinding. I can see why people use that. So, good afternoon, everyone. I heard the talks this morning were excellent, so I'll try not to be too much of a disappointment, but I'll do my best. So, thank you for the introduction and the, thank you. Oh, I don't know what that is. Is this a tracker? I don't know. It's a speaker. I don't know what it is. Okay, I consent. I don't know what it is, but I consent. Okay, so this morning I'll be speaking about some of our partnership projects with the State of Hawaii Departments of Education as well as the Department of Health. To give a little bit of a background, as we all know, youth mental health problems are very common, but unfortunately youth rarely receive services or treatment services for their problems. And in particular, sometimes for Asian American teens, they can face a range of psychological difficulties that intersect with their constellation of sort of where they are in life with regard to language and cultural barriers, racist encounters ranging from overt aggressions to microaggressions. Broadly speaking, the field of clinical psychology has spent mid-90s, so this is almost 30 years now. It's been almost 30 years. I like to walk the room, but every time I cross that, I sacrifice 1% of my vision. I'm willing to do that for this room. I feel like this is a good place. But roughly for about 30 years right now, the field of clinical psychology has spent a lot of time and resources, and 3 decades now, trying to develop treatments and demonstrate that treatments do work for children and families. Okay. Over time, these winning treatments have become known as evidence-based practices, or EBPs. It's generally speaking, EBPs refer to treatments that were developed and tested, most of the time in university settings, but sometimes in community settings, and have been shown to outperform another kind of treatments. Okay? So we'll be using this shorthand a lot throughout our presentation. And over the last 30 years, hundreds of these evidence-based or these EBP programs have been developed. Okay, so building upon the last slide, if you look at the treatment outcome literature and you break it down by type of youth mental health problem, right? So treating youth anxiety. I feel like since I have a laser, I have to use it, even though you all can see I'm clearly talking about anxiety. Treating youth disruptive behavior, ADHD problems, and trauma. Hundreds and hundreds of treatments have been developed, these winning treatments, right? So 256 evidence-based programs for anxiety, 184 for disruptive, and so forth and so forth. And if you're a therapist, if you're a parent, or somebody interested, you can find these online, right? So here's an example of a trauma-based, evidence-based program. Trauma-focused CBT for children and adolescents. This is just on Amazon. You could go and get these books, right, if you wanted to. So, how has the availability of literally hundreds of these protocols impacted public mental health? Anybody want to guess? Take a wild guess? Not too much. Yeah, I was just like, oh, it's all solved, and it's like that's the end of my presentation. I'll see you guys later. Yeah, so not that much. right? There's a lot of difficulties with wide-scale dissemination and implementation of these so-called EBPs. Frequently, not universally, but frequently therapists receive little training in graduate school on some of these approaches. Continuing education workshops on EBP programs have been shown to change maybe attitudes and knowledge, but in terms of day-to-day therapist behaviors, it hasn't been shown to change too much in terms of the typical 1-2 day workshops. Ongoing trainings that extend beyond workshops, sort of week-long practice cases, ongoing consultation for months, maybe even a year. This has been shown to change practices, but those are often lengthy and expensive, and a lot of times cultures and infrastructures can be might not sort of jigsaw well with some of these interventions. I'm speaking very broadly, of course, just generally speaking. Okay, so the gist of today's talk is, I guess, the overall thesis or the assertion, I guess, if you will, is that reframing the concept of evidence-based practice, or EBP itself, can be helpful for large-scale dissemination and implementation into public mental health settings. So there are different ways that the scientific community has gone to define evidence-based practice, and up until now I have been talking about brand name treatments, right? So that very specific link on Amazon.com, trauma-focused CBT for adolescents by a specific author, and then you can call the treatment developers, have them fly down, do week-long training, so forth and so forth. And a complementary way for defining evidence-based practice is known as the practice element, or the common element metric. Okay, so we'll talk about that right now. Right. So the first way, brand name treatment manuals. When we talk about a brand name approach, it's very, usually comes in a glossy book cover. There's usually some kind of logo. There's usually some kind of treatment developer, professional support, and all of these things are great. Right? These are great. So the complementary metric, so what I want to stress that I'm not talking instead of or to supplant or replace. The complementary metric, though, could be the practice element metric. So we'll be using the term practice element for the remainder of this talk, and that refers to a discrete technique that is a part of the larger brand name approach. Right? So a discrete technique such as timeout or relaxation. So as an example, here we have 3 brand name treatment protocols, right? So the TFCBT book that we just talked about, a different TFCBT book, and an emotion-focused therapy for youth book. And here we have 6 different practice elements or discrete clinical ingredients associated with each of these books or treatment approaches. Okay, so I haven't coded these manuals, so these are just for instances. But the idea is that when you group evidence-based protocols together by problem type, you take all of the anxiety manuals, you put them in one pile, you take all of the trauma manuals, you put them in one pile, you put all of the disruptive manuals, you put them in one pile. Group by problem area, they tend to be more similar than they are different. Now obviously there are differences, but they tend to be more similar if you look at them through the lens of the practice element way. Okay, this is all building on Bruce Sharpeda's work. Right, so in this specific example, all 3 brand name approaches contain the discrete ingredient or practice element of psychoeducation for the child, which is going over helping the youth and family understand how a particular problem develops, what maintains it, and how to treat it. For now, it's not, I can briefly go over what these are, but it's not important to understand exactly what each of them are, just that they're discrete techniques or ingredients. Okay? In this example, all of them contain the discrete technique or ingredient of cognitive restructuring, helping kids reframe their thoughts to be more positive. 2 of the 3 contain exposure, 2 of the 3 contain relaxation, and so forth and so forth. Oh, that's what I was trying to do, but I have a laser, so we don't need to do that. Okay, right, so this is an example. Okay, so at this point, you're scratching your head, so I'd like to go to what I call the garlic chicken analogy. It hasn't failed me yet, so hopefully it doesn't fail me here. But just basically, if you were to take this analogy and think about what are some of the best brand name restaurants for garlic chicken on the island of Oahu, and here's where sometimes the audience bursts out into a riot because there's fight and vitriol about which one is the best. But let's say that some people said it might be Sugoi, might be En Fuego, and might be Zippy's. Okay? So these are the 3 top or evidence-based, the winning garlic chicken recipes. Okay? My guess is that all 3 of them for the recipe of garlic chicken probably contain chicken. All 3 of them probably contain shoyu. All 3 of them probably contain garlic and sugar. And maybe they might differ. Maybe some use flour or cornstarch or whatever. Okay? So again, this is a complementary way of defining things, this element-based approach. But it has potential cascading implications for large-scale dissemination and implementation. Right? So the idea here would be some people in our field believe that unless you go to Sugoi, En Fuego, or Zippy's, you are not eating garlic chicken. I don't care if your mom makes it better. I don't care if you're using the exact same recipes. I don't care what you call that. That is not garlic chicken. And I refuse to allow you to call that garlic chicken. And some people say, well, if I'm using all the same ingredients, and actually I think my mom makes a little bit better one, I think she's making garlic chicken. I don't know what you can call it. But so the field is moving along in this way in some regards, but sometimes there can be fierce debate. So getting back to our analogy, no, this is the analogy. Moving away from the analogy, what are some of the commonalities across all youth trauma brand name manuals, right? So there are 52 winning protocols so far, and 95% of them contain that technique or discrete ingredient of psychoeducation for child. A lot of psychoeducation. We touched base on that briefly, right? So the idea of talking about how this problem develops. No, you're not going crazy. This is kind of a normal thing, a normal response to an abnormal situation, and so forth and so forth. 89% contain cognitive, and so forth here. So looking at this, right, even if you look at the top 3, it is remarkable that across 52 of these winning protocols, over 80% of them contain exposure, cognitive, and psychoeducation, with the potential implication being that maybe we can try to move away from all or nothing approaches to evidence-based practice implementation, especially in large-scale public mental health systems. Right, so at the end of the day, sometimes our partnerships with departments of education and health here can focus on the idea of maybe we should try to focus on getting these top 5 treatments as much as we can into community settings, or even top 3. So here are some examples of quality improvement initiatives rooted in this practice element metric that I think would be more difficult if we did not adopt this metric. Again, this is a complementary metric. I'm not trying to supplant the brand name approach. It does have its time and place, and we utilize both approaches in departments of education and health. Okay, so I'm going to just try to breeze through 7 different sort of example partnership initiatives that are rooted in the practice element metric. Okay, so the first one, the big picture, well, here are some pictures. So a lot of our work at our center, through our staff, as well as some of our students and alumni like Trina and Marina and some other people in the room I'm probably forgetting, involve consultation, training, and partnership in the Department of Education for their school mental health therapists. So for example, here's a picture, and we call these learning hui. So here's an example of a learning hui with the Lahaina School Mental Health Program, pre and post-fire. This was just taken a couple of months ago, winter to Oahu. And they are very fond of these approaches because it avoids an all or nothing approach, and it really acknowledges their expertise, right? So it goes back to your mom or your grandma, your auntie, or whoever cooking garlic chicken, because a lot of times when we go into the community setting, they say, well, I'm already kind of using these ingredients, and we can start from there. right? We can start from there. We can acknowledge their expertise. We can maybe give them a different way about thinking about stuff. And to be honest, I learn every single learning Hui that I've had the privilege of partnering with, I learn from them as well, right? So when people talk about true practice to research pipelines, like this is the way to do it, I think. A second way, rooted in the practice element metric, is that we've partnered with both departments of education and health for trainings rooted in the practice element metric, right? So we talked about how training in the full-on 16-week course of therapy can be very expensive and lengthy, but if you break it down into discrete elements, so at the end of the day, right, so this can be blasphemy by some, but again, the big picture is we try to avoid all or nothing approaches. You say, at the end of the day, we just want to see if we can get people to use exposure, psychoeducation, and cognitive restructuring. So sometimes we do trainings just on these techniques. Now we talk about how to assemble them, and we let them know that there's also the gold standard approach for doing all of it. But the big picture is that we've done large-scale trainings a while back, 2008 and 2009. We've done some research papers on here showing that we can change some small behaviors and knowledge and attitudes. And these trainings have just restarted again in 2021, 2022, and it's continuing on right now to 2024. A third quality improvement initiative rooted in the practice element metric is our practice management systems that both the Department of Health and Department of Education have built for monitoring what therapists are doing, down to the individual therapists, up to larger units like clinics, up to larger districts, up to the state level. So within the Department of Health, CAMD, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Division, they launched their most recent practice management system in 2019. Now that's all like a bunch of gibberish, but the big picture is that for any youth served in the Department of Health, every therapist documents every single treatment session, what treatment target they did, so anxiety, depression, trauma, the things I talked about, as well as which practice element that they use, one or more practice elements. Okay, so I'm gonna zoom into this a little bit, so just don't worry about it. And you're like, I don't have my telescope to see what this is. But basically, this is a screenshot. So as a supervisor, one of the hats I wear, supervisor at the Center for Cognitive Behavior Therapy, I can log in to the CAMD portal, and I can see how the youth treated at my clinic, what are the specific ingredients they're getting broken down my problem area. So I can see, it's like I want to see what my therapists are doing in my clinic for anxiety. It's a very small training clinic. So in this picture here, we can see after you designate the treatment time period, let's say, so in the last year. So in the last year, every youth treated at the Center for CBT at UH Manoa, for anxiety kids, we treated 3 youth. And here we can see what are the practice elements that our youth are getting. Okay, so the way to read this is that, so 3 youth, so 33%, so 1 out of 3 youth received the technique of exposure, and exposure has a technique, evidence-based score of 81%. It appears in 81.2% of evidence-based protocols. It is the most common technique for anxiety. Therefore, if only 1 out of the 3 youth in our clinic are being treated, maybe we might want to increase the utilization of exposure. Cognitive coping is in 63%, and again, only 1 out of 3 youth in my clinic had that technique, so maybe we want to increase that. So the idea is that because the practice management system in the Department of Health, for every single session, for every single youth, is monitoring what targets are being addressed and which practice elements, we can see per clinic, per therapist, you aggregate therapist, clinic, county, state. You can get a good sense of what people are doing. Oh, the exposure, sorry. And the Department of Education, through one of our partnerships, actually the MOA for using the same style of things was led by Trina. Trina had executed that MOA between Department of Education and Health. They launched their electronic practice management system called Lokahi in January 2023. What time is? I've been talking for 20 minutes. Sorry. So similarly, they can start looking at a more granular level. What are the practices that they're doing? I started it. Holy cow. Okay, so we're going to just rip through the last ones then. We can also, what we've been also trying to do is develop performance evaluation centered on practice elements, so fidelity measures. So we've developed some fidelity measures for a variety of practice elements, common ones like exposure and problem solving. Right? So the idea of fidelity a lot of times occurs at the larger brand name level, but we can look at fidelity or at the practice element level. We've also had sort of youth-empowered and parent-empowered initiatives, such as our Help Your Keiki website through the Department of Health. Right, Help Your Keiki website. Basically, the big picture about the Help Your Keiki website is that it is for parents, by parents, in partnership with university and community partners. It is the only evidence-based practice website on children's mental health problems that intersects parent voice plus the practice element metric. And we've developed screeners based on practice element metrics too. So we're trying to develop these social, emotional, evidence-based developmental strength survey. Actually, Marina's an expert on that. This is her line of research. But basically what it is it's a youth self-report, and rather than ask youth about their problems with anxiety and depression, it's asking about how much do they do these techniques of cognitive and exposure and those things in their daily life. And finally, we can examine the literature growth for practice element changes over time. So basically what we see here is a paper that we did recently with one of the speakers this morning, Kelsey, where we looked at winning treatments over time from 1965 to 2017. And we can see the brand name line continues to grow. This is for anxiety protocols. In the last 8 years, it went up to 256, if you remember. So exponential growth of brand name protocols, but practice elements continue to remain the same. So all of these brand name recipes continue to proliferate and flourish, but the underlying ingredient profile tends to stay the same. Okay, sorry, and I went over by a lot.
Still have time.
Okay, sorry.
You have like 10 minutes.
I have 10 minutes. Okay, and I'm going to tell bad jokes, and you're all going to regret inviting me. Okay, so maybe we can go question and answer. That was the end of the presentation. Okay, sorry, I don't know. I talked so fast. Okay.
Do you remember?
I don't even know. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So we have questions.
Yeah, Q&A.
Okay. Yeah. So any questions or comments? Yes.
Awesome talk. I wonder, as we approach the year mark of what happened in Lahaina, Kula, how well prepared are the schools when they reopen to students for addressing maybe the needs that might be anticipated amongst the youth? And we're working with the counselors. You touched a little bit about that in your talk, and I wonder if also the teachers might be equipped with some, because they are the ones really face-to-face with the students for the bulk of the day, and I wonder if that's also considered in some of these models for intervening.
Sure. Yeah. So maybe just to put a face to it. Actually, we have had the pleasure and I guess privilege of partnering with the Lahaina School Mental Health Program for quite some time right now. So this picture, actually Trina's in this picture somewhere. There's Trina, right there. There's Trina. And I'm wearing the same shirt today, how embarrassing. Look, it's the exact same shirt. It's the exact same shirt. I'm not wearing red pants though. I'm gonna go, this talk is ruined. I have like 2 nice shirts. And then here's us after. And actually we just had a talk, we've been having weekly meetings with the Lahaina School Mental Health Program since the fires. I think, so zooming out, big picture, I don't want to get too dark or weird about it, but like one interesting potential insight is that can we put it? The building of infrastructure, building of training, and the commitment to this practice element-based approach preceded the wildfire. So if you notice, the practice management system launched in the beginning of January 2023. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that Lahaina and the larger Department of Education had a lot of these trainings and commitments to this evidence-based practice approach long before the fires. And I'm a fan of the branding approach. So I got trained, I went to a training at the trauma-focused CBT folks, and I have a lot of respect for them and Cohen and Manarino, and they do a lot of great work and do all of that stuff. And one of the profound things that that stuck with me from doing a week-long training and practice cases and all these kinds of things was them saying something along the lines of, given the base rate of trauma in our community settings, a lot of times with the families that we work with, it's not if they experience something traumatizing, it's when, right? So without seeming too morbid about it, like all of these initiatives were kind of like happening in the background, so that who could have predicted when the wildfires happened, this practice element approach, how many of us are doing relaxation, how many of us are doing exposure, how many of us are doing communication skills, and all of these things. The trainings have been going on for a while. The trainings were revitalized in 2022, I think, for DOE. They were, I think, about as well prepared as they could be for a once-in-a-century kind of issue. And one of the interesting things that happened, too, was that because of this picture is taken in 2022, but this is a 2-year Hui partnership, meeting weekly, Trina and myself and some other people. And we're able to get on the phone with our Lahaina friends about a week after, and we were able to kind of, the trust was already there, right? So some of the difficulties, some of the great work, I'm a huge fan of the national NCTSN came in and everything, but they had to establish the rapport and the trust and then figure out what's going on, versus we were already kind of embedded in text messaging and the whole kind of 9 yards there. So, yeah. So I think they're about as well prepared as they could be, and yeah, I think we have weekly calls with them and have the privilege of partnering with them. So I think they're in about as good a shape as it could be given what happened, I think. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Who brokers the conversation with the complex areas? So you have Windward. I'm from the non-Huli Waianae complex.
Oh.
So how does that conversation?
Hi, what was your name?
Angela.
Hi, Angela.
Hi.
Hi. It usually happens through. Usually, it's like I'm old now. I don't even know like what the analogy would be, but it's like an arranged. It's partially like an arranged marriage, kind of, or it's kind of like, so like usually like state level leadership might say, I'm under the perception that there's a lot of vacancies. In the, so this year it was actually Lahaina, and the year before was Molokai Lanai. So it's like, there's a lot of vacancies here. Will you go and partner with these people for ongoing consultation? So we'll have like a initial meeting. We'll fly over for initial meetings. I try to bring them donuts, try to get them to like me, try to court each other for a little bit. And if we can make it work, we can make it kind of work. But usually, I guess I'll talk DOE language if you're from non. Usually the DESs will reach out up to state level leadership, so Ida Bonilla, and say, oh, we need help with this or whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. Yes.
My name is Wilson.
Hi, Wilson.
I'm a therapist, and I actually used trauma-focused CBT for a while with children and parents. I really appreciate your thought about the element base for the purpose of mass distribution, and so or nothing, just get something out there in a timely basis. Totally appreciate you get that. My question is, I wonder if applying the same methodology, I don't know if that's beyond, like you use the trauma-focused CBT, which happens to be more modulated itself. Has there been consideration, or wonder if we apply to other evidence-based practices, to what point in the way if we apply this, which in my language, we kind of deconstruct it a little bit to find it become no longer the garlic chicken.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So how do you, what's the consideration and how do you apply this, but without ended up now you're too deconstructed and too piecewise, and you lose the reason why it's EVP from the first place?
Sure. Thanks, Wilson. That's a really good question. I think, so the practice element approach, I think a major driver of it is routine and repeated assessment, almost a week by week or session by session basis on measuring and monitoring a goal that the family is working towards. Right, so if it's like we are monitoring the number of days that my kid can go to school, or monitoring the number of nightmares, or I don't know, it could be whatever. So, sort of under the hood, or going really in complementing the practice, this approach that we mentioned, is the idea that if you're monitoring progress on a session by session, weekly, monthly basis. Here's going to be like a little bit of maybe of a radical idea. I don't know if it matters too much if we're making garlic chicken or not. That is, if we can reduce the number of nightmares or whatever the idiographic goal is for the family, maybe it doesn't matter if it's trauma-focused CBT or not, or garlic chicken or not. So the utilization of this approach really hinges on repeated assessment of client and family centered goals, and we don't get too preoccupied with, I guess, how can we put it? The profile, the ingredient profile, is a starting place and one source of consideration for assembling the treatment plan. And within that treatment plan, we get ongoing in-your-face feedback on if it's working or not, and we may or may not get too preoccupied with if it's adhering to the initial EVP. Yeah, because that, I guess, with the idea being the real evidence is whether or not that specific youth and family is getting better.
So basically you're safeguarding it with ongoing measuring outcomes in a way, so you're creating an EVP of EVP.
Yes, so it's very client specific, right? So it's another analogy would be like, so many diets out there, right? It's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different diets. So we don't become preoccupied with fidelity to a specific diet. We get preoccupied with what is your weight on that scale every single day.
Sure.
And I don't care what diet you're using, as long as it's getting better.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you can keep going with garlic chicken.
Oh, sure. Yeah, people seem to remember that.
Right, like my grandma makes me garlic chicken because she loves me.
Uh-huh.
Because she cares about nurturing her the next generation. Like that's the reason that she makes the garlic chicken, and that nurtures. Zippy's wants to sustain their business, so they make good garlic chicken so that buy it, and then they will sustain their business. So when you break that down to the elements piece like you're doing, it is a curiosity around the term treatment and mental health, right? What are we really interested ultimately in funding in terms of how we say treatment for youth and these symptoms that they're having? And it might be making sure that grandma can keep her house so she can keep making the garlic chicken. And so I think it's an interesting expansion on the potential for how we imagine and therefore fund certain things in relationship to the promotion of youth and health. I appreciate the breakdown.
No. Thank you. How are we doing on time?
Okay, 1 more minute.
One more minute, one last question.
Can I just
Hey, Jeff.
clarify something for you?
Sure.
It sounds like the idea of getting that weekly measurement is an accountability piece,
Mhm.
and that's fundable. If you're just going with, the people say they're feeling better, or we measured it once every couple months, is that as fundable? Is that as supported by teachers and other people who are stakeholders in this?
I'm not too sure about that. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that, well, I don't know. I suspect that this area of research around the measurement-based care, if you will, generally tends to support the idea that if you measure something frequently and use that to steer outcomes, kids get better. Kids get better quicker. On the front lines about having teachers and everybody fill out forms every single week you meet them, it's very, very difficult to do.
So how did you choose week? I mean, are certain people, stakeholders, like, weekly is too much, I'm too busy doing these forms?
Sure.
How did you get past that piece?
So, I mean, I think that's where, I think that's where some of the art of working with youth and families comes into play. So, I'm a big fan. Everybody has a different style. So I'm a big fan for the weekly measures. We use a lot of more quick and dirty measures. So it could be, it's probably it is less reliable and less valid, but it could be like a mood rating. On a scale from 0 to 10, how are you feeling today? 10 being the most, 0 being the least. Once kids get used to that, it takes, Jeff, it takes 3 seconds to get that rating. And then we complement that with maybe monthly or quarterly, more of a standardized T-score type, reliable, valid kind of measure, something like that. So, yeah. Thank you for the question. I think we're out of time. Okay, thank you.